In part 2 of our lesson on complex numbers, we're going to look at the definition of complex numbers and plot them in the complex plane. So a complex number is of the form a plus bi, where a and b are both real numbers. So I've got a real part to my complex number, the a, and then I have an imaginary part to my complex number. That's the bi. So the real part has no imaginary thing attached to it, but the imaginary part has the I. Real numbers, the ones that you're used to working with, numbers that I could put on a number line like 2 or 4 or 18, are complex numbers. They just don't have an imaginary part. Think of it as 2 plus 0i. That 0i doesn't need to be there. An imaginary number is the ones we're going to start looking at today, where there's both a real part to it and an imaginary part. For example, 2 minus 3i has a real part of 2 and an imaginary part of negative 3i. Or negative 3 plus 2i again. Here's an imaginary number, a real part and an imaginary part. Final kind is a pure imaginary number, one that has no real part but only an imaginary part. For example, 6i would be a pure imaginary number. No real part to speak of, only the imaginary part. The first thing we'll do with these complex numbers is we're going to plot them in the complex plane. You're used to seeing an xy axis in the Cartesian coordinate system with an x-axis, a y-axis. What we're going to do is we're going to replace the x-axis with the real axis, and then the y-axis we're going to replace and call it the imaginary axis. Now, as I plot these points, we'll start with this one, 2 minus 3i. I started the origin of the complex plane. 2 is the real part, so I'm going to move my cursor over to 2 on the real axis. Negative 3i is the imaginary part, so that means I'm going to go down to negative 3 on the imaginary axis and plot my point. There would be 2 minus 3i. Next is negative 3 plus 2i. Process works in the same fashion. Negative 3 means 3 to the left, plus 2i means go up 2, plot my point. Negative 3 plus 2i is right there. The last one, a purely imaginary number, we're going to go ahead and plot on just the imaginary axis. So for this one, I'll use a different color because my imaginary word is in the way. 6i, we're going to go up 6 and plot our point. There would be 6i plotted in the complex plane. So pretty simple stuff to plot complex numbers. Real axis, imaginary axis, good to go.